President Biden, meanwhile, will travel to Charleston, South Carolina later today to deliver a campaign speech at the Mother Emanuel Church, which is the site of the 2015 mass shooting where an admitted white supremacist murdered 9 black parishioners during a Bible study. The Biden campaign says his speech will note it is the responsibility of elected officials to root out the kind of hate that motivated the 2015 shooting. Biden is also expected to warn against the Trump campaign, saying it's fueled by a hate-filled agenda that runs counter to what America is.
And you, of course, Reverend Al, you, of course, have Republican politicians who get very incensed when you start talking about white supremacy, some even suggesting there's no such thing, that it's made up by the media.
No, and I think that by President Biden going back to Charleston today to Mother Emanuel underscores how ludicrous it is to deny white supremacy. The one who killed these 9 people at Bible study, including the pastor who I knew, Reverend Pinkley, he said himself, the shooter, that I'm a white supremacist. This is not something that somebody put on him. And I remember you and Mika, Joe, going down and did this show from in front of the church. Not days after that, I was there with you. I spoke at 2 of the funerals, and the whole country gripped with the fact that white supremacy was alive and well. And for the president to go and underscore that today, I think is very important because it gives us reason to be concerned about those that try to mainstream that into the American political contest of the year.
Joining us now from South Carolina is the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Jamie Harrison. Jamie, what are you expecting to hear from the president today, and how important is it that he makes the distinction, he makes the parallel, he makes the direct connection between Donald Trump and white supremacy?
Well, Joe and Mika, it's so great to see all of you, Reverend Al. You know, today's visit for the president is going to be a pretty emotional one for many of us here in South Carolina. You know, if you've ever been to South Carolina, you know the significance of Mother Emanuel Church, not just to folks in Charleston, but I think to black folks throughout the South. This was a place where churchgoers met in secret when black churches were banned throughout the South. It was a place where black South Carolinians came together in 1822 to organize a slave revolt. And it was also the place where 9 beautiful souls were taken away from us one June night in 2015. So it's going to be, this is not a campaign stop. This is really one of those moments in which we're going to see who Joe Biden is. This is a man with moral clarity, but this is also a man that when there were no cameras, he and Dr. Biden went to worship with the families and the parishioners at Mother Emanuel after that massacre. We all know about Barack Obama being there and singing Amazing Grace, but many people don't know that Joe Biden and Dr. Biden went there to worship with those parishioners. He embodies that whole notion, Rev, as you know, weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And he is a man who has seen so much pain, decided to go and express that there is light in the morning. And so he's going to be here to express freedom, that black folks should be able to go and pray in their church freely without having to look around their shoulders worried about whether or not somebody's come to take away their lives just because of the color of their skin. And so it is going to be an emotional thing for us, Mika. I think it'll be emotional for the president as well, to come back to that church, to come back with those families impacted, to come back to the state of South Carolina, and to talk about freedom and the importance of freedom. If anybody knows freedom, black folks in this country understand the struggle. We continue to struggle for freedom in this nation. And I think Joe Biden's going to speak to that today.
Chairman Harrison, one of the things that came to mind when it was announced he was going back to Charleston to Mother Emanuel is I remember in January of 2020, he spoke for our Martin Luther King Breakfast National Action Network in Washington. and he pulled Martin Luther King III out to the side and said that this guy, what he did with Charlottesville, talking about Trump and talking about how some of these good people on both sides, I think I really am going to run. And that's when we first started hearing why he wanted to run, and then he did a little while later run. Talk about how he has really tried to deal with this issue of race and anti-Semitism, because Charlottesville, they were marching against both blacks and Jews and against Islamophobia. Talk about how this is core to him, contrasted with a guy like Donald Trump, who's now talking coming into this weekend about Lincoln could have negotiated the Civil War, or a former governor of your state in South Carolina that acts like slavery wasn't a central part of what the Civil War was about. You're the chairman of the party. The contrast I want you to talk about between the Republican candidates and this president.
Well, this is the thing about Joe Biden. The contrast is so clear between himself and MAGA Republicans like Donald Trump and Nikki Haley. Here, he got into this race because he said we're battling for the soul of the nation, for the soul of the nation. And that battle still continues today. When you, as governor of South Carolina, former governor of South Carolina, the reason why secession happened here in the state, the first state to do it, the reason why it happened is because of slavery, and it's even listed in the Articles of Secession. Yeah, you would think a person who was president of the party of Lincoln would understand the importance of the battle for this nation's soul during the Civil War and would celebrate that, and instead talk about negotiating whether or not slavery is right or wrong. Joe Biden understands very, very clearly what this battle is all about and how core and how central black folks are to this battle. When you think about everything he's done, the first thing he did, even before he became the president of the United States, African-American woman vice president, breaking through that glass ceiling, African-American woman on the Supreme Court, breaking through that tradition to make sure that that voice was represented. So instead of having black folks at the back of the bus under Joe Biden, we are driving the bus. And that's what's so important right now, and why I'm so proud. I'm the second person to be elected chair of the black person to be elected chair of DNC, third black person to hold this role. But it was because of Joe Biden saying that let's give this guy a chance. Let's have this voice represented in terms of how this party moves forward. And I can go over and over again of how he has done this. So this is at core central of who he is. He's not going to run away from it. It is not about something that is politically poll tested. It is about who Joe Biden is and what he fights for each and every day for all of Americans, but specifically so that black Americans understand that he sees them, that he hears them, and that he's fighting for them every single day.
All right, DNC Chairman Jamie Harrison, thank you so much. As always,